Cristiano Ronaldo had seen his fair share of emotions. From the deafening roar of stadiums to the silent prayers before a penalty kick, he understood pressure, joy, heartbreak. But nothing could have prepared him for what he witnessed that day in the hospital. What started as a routine charity visit would soon turn into a story that would change a life forever. He had just finished greeting a group of children when a soft, muffled sound caught his attention. A quiet sobbing, almost drowned out by the beeping of machines and the murmur of hospital staff. He turned his head, scanning the room, and then he saw her. An old woman, frail and trembling, her thin fingers gripping the bedsheet as she wept. Something about her sorrow struck him. It wasn't just the pain of illness. It was deeper, heavier, as though she carried a grief that couldn't be put into words. He walked toward her, his presence commanding yet gentle. "Madam, are you all right?" His voice was soft, careful not to startle her. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with tears, but she didn't answer. A nurse nearby placed a hand on his arm and motioned for him to step aside. "She's not crying for herself," the nurse whispered. "She's crying for her son." A frown creased Ronaldo's forehead. He glanced back at the woman, her chest rising and falling with slow, laboured breaths. "Her son?" he asked. The nurse hesitated, then explained. The old woman had an adult son with a severe mental deficiency. His mind was that of a child's, unable to care for himself, unable to survive on his own. He had no siblings, no father, just her. And now, with her life slipping away, he was alone in a world that would not understand him. That thought was breaking her more than any illness ever could. A heavy silence settled between them. Ronaldo's jaw tightened. He couldn't imagine a pain like that. A mother, not fearing her own death, but the fate of the one she would leave behind. "Where is he now?" Ronaldo asked. The nurse's face darkened. "We don't know. He wandered off earlier today. We've tried looking for him, but," she sighed, "he doesn't respond well to strangers." Something in Ronaldo's chest clenched. He didn't know this woman, had never met her before, and yet in that moment he felt the weight of her fear. He wasn't just an athlete, he was a father. He knew what it meant to protect, to provide, to love beyond limits. He didn't hesitate. "I'll find him." The hospital staff stared at him, unsure if they had heard correctly. But Ronaldo had already pulled out his phone, calling his security team. Within minutes the search had begun. He stepped out into the evening air, determination in his stride. The city was vast and time was slipping away. Hours passed. His team checked shelters, asked around at bus stations, searched the streets. Nothing. Ronaldo's frustration grew, but he refused to give up. He imagined the old woman lying there, waiting, her heart breaking with each passing second. Then, finally, a breakthrough. A social worker recognized the description. The young man had been seen near an abandoned park sitting alone on a bench. Ronaldo drove there himself. The park was eerily quiet, bathed in the dim glow of streetlights, and there, on a worn-out bench, sat the young man. His clothes were wrinkled, his hands clutched together tightly, rocking slightly as if trying to comfort himself. Ronaldo approached slowly, crouching down to meet his gaze. "Hey, my friend," he said softly. The young man flinched but didn't run. His eyes were filled with fear, confusion, loneliness. Ronaldo reached out, offering his hand. "Let's go see your mother." The young man hesitated, then, as if something in Ronaldo's voice reassured him, he reached out, his fingers barely brushing against Ronaldo's. That was all he needed. Gently, carefully, Ronaldo helped him up and led him to the car. When they arrived at the hospital, the old woman's breath was faint, her eyes fluttering as she fought against exhaustion. But when she saw her son, a miracle happened. Strength surged through her frail body, and she reached out with trembling hands. "My boy," she whispered, tears rolling down her sunken cheeks. Her son rushed to her side, gripping her hand tightly, pressing his forehead against it like a child desperate for comfort. He clung to her with the desperation of someone who had been lost in the dark for far too long and had finally found the light. His whole body shook as he whimpered, his fingers tracing the veins on her frail hands as if memorizing them. His breath came in uneven gasps, and his eyes, filled with an innocence untouched by the world's cruelty, searched hers for reassurance. She cupped his face with her trembling hands, her thumb brushing away his tears even as her own continued to fall. "I was so afraid you'd be alone," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But you're here, my love. You're here." Her son let out a soft, aching sound, nuzzling into her touch, his grip tightening as if holding on to the last piece of warmth he had left in the world. Ronaldo stood back, watching the moment unfold, feeling his own throat tighten. He had done what he could, but there was still one more thing left to do. He stepped forward, kneeling beside the bed. The old woman looked at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also fear. The same fear that had plagued her from the beginning. What would happen to her son when she was gone? Ronaldo took her hand gently. "Don't worry," he said. "I promise you, he will never be alone." Her breath hitched. He explained he would personally ensure that her son was placed in a world-class care facility, one where he would be safe, loved, and provided for. He would have the best doctors, the best caregivers, and Ronaldo himself would check on him, always. The old woman let out a shaky breath, as if the weight of the world had finally lifted from her fragile shoulders. Her fingers tightened around his, then slowly she closed her eyes. A few moments later, she was gone. A silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft sobs of her son. Ronaldo remained kneeling, head bowed, feeling the enormity of the moment. Then gently he placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. "You're not alone," he murmured, and he meant it. Within days, everything was set in motion. Ronaldo ensured the young man was placed in a top-tier care facility, one designed not just for support, but for a life filled with warmth and dignity. The surroundings were peaceful, with lush gardens, sunlit rooms, and a staff trained to provide both care and companionship. Here, he wouldn't just be looked after, he would belong. But the greatest promise wasn't in the arrangements. It was in Ronaldo's presence. He visited often, not out of duty, but because he wanted to. Little by little, the young man changed. The fear in his eyes softened, his smiles became more frequent, and for the first time since losing his mother, he wasn't alone. And as Ronaldo walked through those doors time and time again, he knew this wasn't just about keeping a promise, it was about making sure it truly meant something. And though the world knew Cristiano Ronaldo for his goals, his trophies, his fame, this was a victory unlike any other. Because true greatness isn't measured in accolades. It's measured in the moments when no one is watching, in the promises kept, and in the lives changed forever. It's in the silent gestures of kindness, the unwavering commitment to another's well-being, and the courage to step beyond fame to become a guardian of hope. And in that hospital room, on that fateful day, Ronaldo proved that the most meaningful victories are not the ones etched in history books, but the ones etched in human hearts.